So, hi. I guess if everyone's ready, we can start the talk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Leo. I'm a member of the Data Science Guild working here at BCS. And as I hope at least those of you who are in the Data Science Guild know, we're trying to start a new series of talks. So this is another talk brought to you by the Data Science Guild, which is going to be a bit different than our normal talks. So it's by an artist and researcher, Luba Elliott, who is going to talk to us about how we can use AI in the creative arts. So, without further ado.
Great, thank you so much, Leo. Yes, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my background so you can understand where I'm coming from. So these are some of the things I do. So I started the Creative AI meetup in London, and we run monthly events hosting various speakers on topics related to applying AI in the creative space. And I have an art book of my own, which I'll tell you about later. I also support TensorFlow, and I blog about contemporary art. So I'm trying to kind of bridge the gap between the art world and the technology side. So this is a little bit more about my meetup. So this is a photo from one of our recent events of an AI improv duo. So this guy, he's actually a research scientist at DeepMind, but apparently that's not enough challenge for him or not cool enough to devote his main existence to. So what he does, in addition, is he does improv with a bot that he wrote. And for my meetup, he also managed to bring a robot and get it to do some moves. So I'm not going to show you a video right now, but I can send you some links after if you want to see that. And over there's also some people who have presented in my meetup before. So it's mainly more from the technical side, because I think at the moment that's where a lot of the more interesting projects are coming from. And yes, first of all, I wanted to also look at the term creative AI and where does it come from. So from what I consider, it's just a modern rebranding of the field of computational creativity, because ultimately, as soon as technology started appearing, artists were trying to experiment with it in different ways, and there are various universities such as Goldsmiths that devote entire departments that study how machines can create art, compose music, and so on. And so this is just a definition from the Computational Creativity Conference Steering Committee, which kind of looks at creative AI as bridging AI, cognitive psychology, philosophy, and the arts. And below are some goals that they're looking to do. So one is to construct a machine that is capable of human-level creativity. The second is to understand human creativity, and the third is to enhance. And I also felt that I should include those two terms. So the term constructive machine learning, which I actually first came across at the NIPS conference in December, where there was a whole workshop, so a day of talks, many of which had a creative AI component, but the term was very different. And I thought the definition was quite interesting in many ways, because it looks at, the goal is about finding particular instances of the domain which exhibit a particular desired property or properties rather than developing the best model. And there's also the term generative art, which is something that the art community is very familiar with. And that's about using a system with some degree of autonomy to create a complex work of art. And now I'll talk about some projects in the field. So I'll start off with one of my favorites. It's called Beyond the Fence, and it's a computer-generated musical. And what I particularly like about it is that I think the team went a little bit crazy with it, and they try to involve, the computer or the AI systems in terms of the plot, the music, and the lyrics. So yeah, this is a photo from the musical, and basically it was set in the 1980s at a women's colony, and of course there was a love story involved. And yeah, here's just a little bit more detail about that project. So I know that for the musical, they collaborated between various departments, including Goldsmiths University in London, which has the What If machine, and it generated various hypotheses as to how you could direct the plot line. And it was based on an analysis of 1,700 previous musicals. And so based on its suggestion that the musical should be set in the 80s, they picked this particular point and space. And I think what was particularly interesting about the plot side of it is that a lot of the critics felt that the musical, even though it was using all this new technology, it still had problems that many traditional musicals faced, meaning that it was still dated in style, and there were problems with the pacing of the second act. And in terms of the music and the lyrics, so the machines generated a lot of variants, and the humans finally curated it. So I think, as you can see, maybe less than 10% of the songs had input from the computers. So I went to see that musical, and there was also a panel discussion at the end, and they had the technical team and then also somebody from the artistic side, so who normally writes and produces musicals. And I think what was kind of interesting there is that the person who came from the theatre side, he thought it was a great experiment. He learned a lot as to what makes a musical successful, because they've analyzed so many, but it's not something that he would want to do again. So he thought that this was an interesting project because of the AI, rather than because of the specific content kind of generated. And as you can see, what the critics said, it's also kind of average reviews. So they find it interesting because of the concept, but not because of the specific content. Okay, and now I want to move on to an example from film/contemporary art, depending on how you look at it. So this is a project called Auto-Encoding Blade Runner, and it was done by Terence Broad from Goldsmiths, and he was doing it as a master's project. And I think he was studying something like computational arts, but he was not originally a machine learning engineer, but he learned how to train and use variational autoencoders. And then what he did is he got his model to reconstruct the film Blade Runner, scene by scene. And so this is particularly interesting because of the copyright infringement thing. So the end result, so the reconstructed film, was actually so close to the real thing that I think Warner Brothers wrote to him saying, "Hey, you've infringed our copyright." And, of course, that resulted in some welcome media attention for the project. And I know that recently this work has been exhibited at the Whitney Museum. So it's a great achievement for an emerging artist that's been made possible through clever use of AI and, I guess, lucky PR. Oh yeah, so now I'm going to tell you about my project. And I'm very happy that my GIF works. So you can see a traditional book that kind of symbolizes the text that was written by a human author, and then also Dunbo, so the little robot, he represents AI. And so what I have as my artwork is a performance piece where there are two texts, so one written by a human and the other by a machine. And then I find 8 volunteers, I divide them into 4 groups, and I get them to perform one of the following combinations. So, for example, for the human-human, they get the human written text and they perform the text according to their interpretation of a human. And let's say for the human robot text, they perform the human text as if they are robots, whatever they think robots are like. So yeah, perhaps it's a little bit silly, but you know, when you want to go to a conference and you don't want to buy a ticket, but you somehow want to get there for free, and as a speaker, it's actually a good idea to pitch them something, and they accepted me, and because I'm an artist, they even paid for it, so that was good. And in terms of the text, so as I said, I had one text which was written by a machine. And that was kind of my poor efforts of training Torch RNN on a data set of 1 million characters of George Bernard Shaw plays. So as you see, I'm not an expert technologist, so the text probably was not the best you can get from an RNN, but that was kind of my effort. And this is my human. I don't know, do any of you recognize this human here? Good, yes. So this is your colleague, Natalia Alabian. So I think she works in the business intelligence department, and she probably spams you a lot about MicroStrategy. But in addition to that, what she does is that she likes to write in her spare time. And because I also wanted to, outsource as much of this project to others as I could, I thought she'd be a great fit to match my machine to create this wonderful work of art. Yeah, so I did 3 performances, or actually I produced 3 performances because all I do is find people who have to do this, this play. And that was a festival in Berlin, then an academic conference and an art venue. And from these performances, it was, I think the main variable as to whether people guessed correctly which combination people were performing was actually the skill and the imagination and the willingness of the actors. Because there were some who could read a human text, let's say, without much variation, and that would kind of lead to many people to think that it was a robot. So it was quite interesting to make you think as to what our perceptions are of humans and robots in popular culture. So that was kind of my work. And now I wanted to mention the Tate IK Prize, which was one of the major efforts by an art institution a traditional art institution to engage with AI. So they got Microsoft to pay them like 100,000 or so to produce this prize, which is looking at using innovation in response, using technological innovation in response to Tate's collection. And so the winning project, it was this, and it was using contemporary photojournalism and comparing it to the work from the Tate collection and using, facial recognition, object recognition to map similarities between the two. So I think in general the feedback was that some similarities weren't very obvious, but in this picture you can probably see that both represent 2 ladies kind of, interacting or enjoying their company. And so object recognition, facial recognition, they also try to do composition analysis and context analysis. Yeah, so that's that project. And then there's the film Sunspring. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's certainly worth watching very much. So it's an experimental science fiction short written by an LSTM RNN, trained on human screenplays, mainly from movies from the 80s and the 90s. And it was actually done by a BAFTA-nominated filmmaker and a student at ITP in New York as part of their entry for a 48-hour festival on science fiction film in London. And it made into the top 10, but it didn't win. That's maybe because the storytelling was rather special, as you will see if you ever watch the film. But it was an interesting experiment, and of course there was a lot of PR, and Ross, this is the guy who wrote the bot for the script. He now regularly goes to conferences and talks about his work. Okay, so now I wanted to go and look a little bit about why you might want to look at AI in the creative industry, so why you would use it. And these are some general ideas how you could use AI to, let's say, to democratize creativity. So if you don't have strong painting skills, but you still want to create an artwork, you could use style transfer or Deep Dream to change your photo into something that could be considered as art by some. And another point is optimization. So you can tailor your art or your design for the end user, because obviously you have kind of much more data on them and it's easier to tweak. More possibilities. So the algorithm can come up with ideas that you would have never thought about, maybe because of, I don't know, social conditioning. The algorithm can just be crazy. And hopefully all of this will enable us to create new art forms that we can enjoy as humans and that machines also can enjoy. And in terms of its impact, there is a question that it makes creativity more of a commodity, which means that, you know, artists and musicians can maybe start worrying just a little bit, like all those drivers that, you know, the AI will come and steal even their jobs. So there is a question of how you can change the new business models to adapt to that. And you can say that perhaps the role of the artist also has changed. So previously the artist was somebody who would perhaps create the work or manage its creation through some assistance. But now the artist becomes more of a curator, because if your RNN gives you lots of lyrics, you can kind of filter which ones you like best and then integrate them into your work. And another question that is raised is, who is the patron? Who now funds the arts? Because if you look at the years past, it often was the church or, you know, kind of the rich members of society who funded artists. But now, for example, it's the likes of Google that run a lot of programs to encourage technologists and artists to play around with AI and create works. And this is just a timeline of some of the things that happened, I think, mainly in 2015 and 16, just to see how the interest has increased. And you can see that most of the efforts have actually been from the technology side. So Google's obviously been very active with the Deep Dream, with the Magenta, with WaveNet, and also by organizing a conference on the topic in the US. And in terms of art, The new media art scene is doing a few projects, but in terms of the traditional world, it's only really the Tate that has made some efforts that were perhaps not so well received. Yeah, now I'm going to look at some of the projects I mentioned on that. So I guess most of you are familiar with Deep Dream. So yeah, I suppose the convolutional neural net that came out from Google and started making these kind of trippy psychedelic images that are often very colorful. And on that side, you will see Memo's work. So he is an artist and a PhD student at Goldsmiths as well, who managed to sell one of his computer-generated artworks for $8,000 at a conference in the US. And then it's been kind of moving into the mainstream. So there were some music videos. You might have seen Poof with the grocery trip, or there was another one with Years and Years. That was a UK chart-topping band that used Deep Dream in the video. Okay, and style transfer, you're also probably familiar with. And you can see you can convert your photo into the style of Monet or Munch. And this is something that originated in the Bethke Lab at Max Planck Institute in Tübingen, and it was done by Leon Gattis, one of Bethke's students. And they then went on to create a website where you can send your photo and then receive the results. I think it was in a few days. So the speed there was a factor that perhaps didn't make it as successful as this app. This is Prisma. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but same thing, but it's a lot quicker. And it got 7.5 million downloads in the first week it was released. So it was one of the best apps of the summer, download-wise. And then you can finally see that style transfer is really hitting the mainstream when you have a Hollywood actress slash director co-author a paper. So this appeared on Archive a couple of weeks ago, and there was quite a lot of excitement in the Twitter community. You know, that somebody who's played in Twilight would be writing a paper on artificial intelligence. But personally, I find it's great that there is more and more interest from, let's say, the more visible members of the creative community to try to incorporate this into the workflow. But not everybody is so keen on style transfer. So this is something I wrote after the constructive learning machine learning workshop at NIPS, where Simon Colton, one of the computational creativity professors from Goldsmiths, kind of shared his views on the topic in a very controversial format. So NIPS is obviously a conference for predominantly technical people, where, let's say, you wouldn't find very many artists. And he was being very provocative, saying that style transfer is only cool for computer scientists and cannot normally be considered, real art, because it's more of a pastiche. So it's kind of like a copy, and there's too much focus on the product rather than the process, which is nowadays very important in contemporary art. But he does acknowledge that you can still use it in new ways if you find some. And then I wanted to show you some recent works from Mario Klingemann. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he is an artist that is currently in residence at the Google Art Project, or I think in the Google Cultural Institute in Paris. And he's been doing a variety of projects. And recently he started working with GANs. And as you can see, there are some typical results. Again, probably too many body parts. which which is a very common GAN aesthetic. But if you look at it from the artistic side, it's something that is maybe quite cool. It's it's a feature. And yeah, he also talks a little bit about how he gets to some of his images. So he just inputs a stick figure and gets that. And yeah, this is just a comment from him on how even if you use computers to generate art, you can still make sure that it's unique in some way, because his model will keep training, so any images he generates after will look different. And yeah, so I think just to conclude a couple of things, I just wanted to point out some things that you might be interested in Berlin. So of course there is the Transmediale, the digital art festival that is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. And the opening weekend is actually in the next few days, but there will be some exhibitions that will go on for a month, and there'll be activities throughout Berlin on the topic. So one of the things Transmediale addresses is related to AI and machine agents, how systems work, and so on. So there will be some discussions looking at the more academic side of computational creativity from the perspective of the art world and the independent communities. So yeah, it's mainly at the Haus der Kulturen der Welt. And just a couple of other events also part of Transmediale. So Roman Lipski, he's a Polish artist who's living in Berlin. So he collaborated with a team of technologists to create some works called Landschaften aus dem Netz. So I presume it's about landscapes from the web. And sadly, I will miss this exhibition because it opens after I leave, but I'm hoping that maybe some of you will drop by, because it could be quite an interesting collaboration with somebody who's more of a traditional painter rather than a new media artist, and a team of technologists. And then finally, there's a performance by Harm van den Dorpel. So he's, I think he's an artist from the Netherlands who normally lives in Berlin, and he has a PhD in artificial intelligence, and he's always interested in digital art and now in computer-generated imagery. So he will be doing a performance of not suitable for work content at Transmediale Haus der Kulturen der Welt on the evening of this Friday. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. So thank you for listening.
So yeah, thank you very much. That was certainly very that was certainly a very good talk. Sorry. So I guess we can open up the floor to questions.
Hi, thank you for giving this speech. That's very different from what we hear usually, I'd say. I wondered how you see the role of the artist in the future, thinking of all the projects you're following up on, you're seeing. I think art often has the problem that people ask, okay, what did that person think? Like, why did they do it? And not necessarily the artist is supposed to answer, but the artist usually says, so what does it do to you? Like, what questions does it arise? And when you talk about making art more convenient, more fitting to the taste of people, doesn't that dissolve this role to some extent?
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment. And I think the role of the artist will change in the future as more and more artists adopt these new technologies. So I think at the moment, if you create a project that uses AI, chances are the media will write a lot about it because there aren't too many of them. So, it's a huge selling point, and, there is an easy way for you to tell a story about it. But as this becomes more and more commonplace, and people start to differentiate more between kind of the projects and the values or what they're kind of looking to communicate, then of course it'll become much more important and perhaps challenging for the artist to convey what he really wants to. But I think, like, even if he or she uses customization to kind of tailor his art to let's say to the end user or to the viewer, whoever's looking at it or engaging with it, then that's perhaps a way for him to communicate more effectively with him. But then again, there is also a risk that because it's the machine or the algorithm that mediates kind of that message and that tweaks it, that some aspects of it might be lost or be confused. And I feel that at the moment there is a lot of discussion in the artistic community about, the role machines play in kind of what we see and how we behave, particularly if you look at politics.
Thank you. I guess I have a comment and a question. So let me start with a comment. There is this word democratization, which is very fashionable, and it became fashionable recently to democratize with technology certain aspects of life and things and whatnot. And I can think back of late 90s and the following decade, which through different technological breakthroughs, you can argue democratized photography. I mean, everybody is able to take pictures, right? So, but I would argue it was kind of a democratization of the process of making pictures, rather than democratization of the photography as arts. And how far could you compare these processes to, AI as democratization of arts in general? Thank you.
I think that's actually, a very interesting comment that you make. And I suppose in terms of photography and AI, we're probably not quite at the stage to be comparing them quite yet, because I think photography is very easily accessible as a tool. But in terms of AI, I think at the moment you still need to be, well, ideally you need to be able to code a little bit just to tweak the model or to be involved in it more than you are than when you're taking a photograph. But I think the comment that you make saying that, yes, it became easier the process of taking pictures became easier, but not necessarily the process of becoming a photographer, because of course there is so much more that is necessary to take a great photograph rather than just clicking a button and pointing at something. And I suppose the same would probably apply to AI to an extent, right? Because if you learn, if you start using the tools, then your skill level of using these tools will impact a lot on the final version that is created, and so therefore how successfully you're able to communicate your idea. So for example, in the artwork I did, I'm still quite new to the world of machine learning and RNNs, so I know for a fact it's probably not the best text that a computer could generate, but for me it was still a tool that enabled me to outsource the process of writing. And I think for that artwork to be successful, it was much more important for me to build on the kind of the storytelling part, the being creative. How could I sell this idea of, generating text to create an artwork that communicated some meaning that was different from what was already happening. So I don't know if that answered your question a little bit. Good.
Can we ask from Helsinki?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what I wanted to ask is, or actually also start with a comment and then the question, which is, my comment here is, maybe on many people's heads, what is actually art? Are we talking about what art is, or are we talking about making artworks? Because now I feel that also the way we've in this discussion defined the role of an artist, to me it has not changed, but the tools have changed. So the tools artists use, it's not a paintbrush anymore, it is code or whatever distinctions we want to make there and what we want to see. So my question is that, coming from the point of view that art is very much about mastering technology and actually going beyond stretching the technology in itself and then thus developing the technology as well. So that's a very important role of art. And for example, in your artwork about the theater piece, what to me was actually the artistic point of view. What I saw as a really exciting artistic question is you used machine-generated script and then volunteers to show the attitudes humans have towards robots, or the fears, or the kind of emotions. So it was more like, to me, the machine readable generation was really just a tool to get to the actual really good question of human attitudes towards machines and artificial intelligence in general. So what I wanted to ask is, like, what kind of artworks by your colleagues or by yourself would you raise that really transcend the technology and take it to a next level?
Wow. Yeah, you have some great ideas on the topic. And art is very broad and sometimes difficult to define. And I think at the moment there are kind of so many camps in the art field. So of course you have the traditional art world that, well, still shuns the latest technologies to an extent. And then you have the new media art scene, which also perhaps doesn't really want to engage with the traditional art world. And I think also with this kind of creative AI term, because in some ways computational creativity has become rebranded with the word of AI in it, there's also, people who might not consider themselves as artists, but who are also creating works that could be interpreted as artworks by whoever is engaging with them. And in terms of looking at the projects which transcend, let's say, the AI as a tool, then that is a difficult one, because at the moment, I think, as I said, I still feel that if you use AI in any medium, you will get a lot of attention for it. I guess not necessarily critical acclaim, but still interest. And out of the artworks I've seen so far, most would fall into that category. I still think so. For example, the film Sunspring, if you ever watch it, you will realize that it's entertaining maybe because the plot is so bad. And because, it was also some AI involved in it. And yes, it's a difficult one. Personally, I did quite like the musical to an extent, because I learned a lot about the kind of the process, and I felt that they involved many different teams of technologists, also an equal partnership with the arts, and maybe they went a little bit crazy with AI, but I felt it was quite an interesting interpretation for the masses. But otherwise, I think at the moment we're probably still not at the stage where people are creating, very revolutionary work that you would put in a great museum because it was so special. Any more questions?
Yes, also one from Helsinki. So can you hear me, or should I get closer?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can't figure out where you are, though. Can you wait?
Well,
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
So, indeed, I would agree with you that often technology is in art, and many things what we are doing, we might say that we are doing art. Of course, maybe I'm kind of not going to touch that aspect very deeply, but during your presentation, you mentioned that the focus of the artist is going away from actual art creation more towards curation. And here is something that puzzles me in the sense that I always had the impression that artistic skills you can train, but then also they come to you from nature, and it's very it's not a trivial to develop the artistic skills in the set. However, the things like curation, it's looks like more mechanical process to some extent, and lately when you were given the answers on the questions regarding photography, you also kind of mentioned that it's a bit of it's a different story to make a photo, just point and click, and then kind of create artistic photo. And making this comparison, I might also argue that in the photography, the kind of what is the photography? Just point, shoot on the nature, and then do necessary curations. So, can you clarify on that challenge what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it is a very valid point that you make. So I suppose any artist today, as in the past, would have been some sort of curator in a way, because I suppose many artists produce a lot of work independently, and they would still have to figure out which one matches their own standards the best, which one they would want to pass on or sell to others, and which ones they would discard and hide away from the others. And in terms of curation being quite mechanical, I mean, that probably depends how you see it. To me, I still think curation at the very high level should be, there should be a lot of thought going into it. So humans still have to be very much involved. But of course, with a lot of the mechanisms we have today, so all these recommendation systems, we can, I don't know, find the images or the works that, let's say, are more similar or kind of most relevant to whatever we're looking to do. But I still think it should really be the role of the human to find let's say the final selection of the works they want to curate, because they are still responsible in kind of making a story as to why it's these works that are better than the others. Does that kind of answer your? Yeah.
Well, to some extent, yes, it's partially answered, but I'm really sorry the English is not my first one, and I'm maybe missing the concept behind the word curation. So kind of in the things how I understood the curation process is you as a person who has some skills in the given domain. So if you're talking about like photo, which more close to me, so you might be you might have knowledge in the given domain. You might knew what photo to choose in the different context, but not necessarily you are the great photographer. So, and kind of in this respect, I see the curation is basically like really a mechanical selection where not necessarily you need artistic skills, while producing the content, it actually requires more artistic skills than curating the content, unless I'm completely wrong here.
No, I think so. Again, I'm not an expert on the term curating and what a curator does, but I am trying to create an exhibition right now, and I think what you mention is totally in line with what I'm thinking. Is that a curator is somebody who is a domain expert and who should be able to bring together the best or the most representative works in a field, and it is the artist who is probably much more talented in the artistic production. But nowadays, it's also sometimes the case that the artist becomes the curator, because I suppose partly through the research that they do in terms of figure out, the concepts and the execution of the artworks, they also attain a high level of domain expertise.
Hi, may I also ask the next question?
Yeah.
Cool. So thanks a lot for your talk. So I was listening to it and thinking about it from my point of view, namely a researcher of deep learning, like working on some of these algorithms that you mentioned. And I was thinking, is there something like a general recipe for success? How can an algorithm from the deep learning community become viral in the art community? Or if this question is a bit too general and vague, maybe let's take the style transfer paper as a very good example. What was their magic recipe for success? Was it just the pure academic quality of the work? Was it the ease of use of the software they released? Was it some good PR of some early promoters? Or was it just pure luck and randomness?
Yeah, so I think there is no easy recipe for success, but certain things do help. And I would say it's never just about the academic quality. I think what made style transfer interesting to so many people were several things. First of all, for the media, it was interesting because, you could replicate Monet at a click of a button. And, the media often represent the point of view that robots will all come and take our jobs. So for them, it was kind of a very, very easy sell that way. And I think also because it dealt with some traditional art. So, it was almost kind of looking at replicating or, doing something in the style of another work. It perhaps, maybe it engaged some more people from the traditional art world rather than the new media art world, which is where I think a lot of the interest in, let's say, more obviously generative work comes from. And I think also what helped style transfer and Deep Dream is that a lot of the people from the computer science and the technical community found it really cool. So they just started putting their own photos through that. And I remember there was a phase where I saw a lot of people with the Deep Dream profile photos on Twitter.
Yeah, because they were promoting it just to make your own picture with hashtag DeepDream. So they were trying to...
Yeah. Yes, I think it's also kind of partly because it engaged that community very strongly, and from there it probably seeped into the new media arts community, which engaged probably more young people as well. Yeah, but I think it's always difficult to make something that probably will be as successful as Deep Dream or style transfer. But I think there is so much interest in GANs. And I'm surprised that at the moment there still seem to be very few artists who are playing around with them. But I think at the moment, so you have Mario Klingemann who's doing his work, and I think, I don't know if Harm's work is also kind of uses GANs, but that's kind of just at the stage where people are exploring the creative potential of that. Any more questions?
Okay, so let's thank the speaker. And